Save Your Wrench. Today we're doing the most anticipated video that everybody's been asking us about. We're going to do a 951 assembly. So we'll take you step by step through everything that we do to assemble a 951 and the tools needed. For the tools needed, you're going to need your Allen key set, a torque wrench. I use 3/8, a 13 mil, 11 mil, deep and short. And then for our sealant, we're going to use 5/18. And we're going to use some Molle assembly lube to just kind of lube up our gaskets for our first crank. On our disassembly video, if you watched, we took out this Bindex bearing because we bead blast all of our cases and we didn't want to get sand in here. So I use a bearing press tool and lightly tap it in. You can use the appropriate socket. That's the same size if you don't have one. Just make sure it's the outer diameter of this race case, because if you start hitting the edge of this or like inside of it, you're going to damage that bearing and it's not going to spin right. So make sure it goes to the outermost edge of this. And I think we looked at it before and I'm pretty positive a 10 mil fits perfect on it. So use a 10 mil with an extension, rubber mallet, and just gently tap it in. You could also freeze this bearing as well to make it a little bit smaller. Just be careful hammering it if you froze it, because you don't want to shock it and possibly crack it. Alright, so like I said in the beginning, for the case mating and joining everything together, I use 5/18. Some people are going to say right off the bat, this is the wrong step, you should be using tri-bond or whatever it is. If you look at the Seadoo manual, on a CARBed model, 5/18 is what's recommended from Seadoo. If you're doing a DI, which is pretty much the same assembly, that's when you use a silicone base. So if you're doing a CARB, 5/18 is your freaking bread and butter. So when applying 5/18, I do the chamfers where the seals sit first. So I'll do the center seals, which are your seals for your counterbalance. I'll do the outer chamfers, which are your seals for the actual crank itself. And then I'll do the seals that are on your counterbalance shaft, which have the caps with your O-rings on the outsides. And then I'll also put some 5/18 here where your gasket or where your actual seal is for your counterbalance shaft, along with the end seal as well. So we'll do that now, and then I'll show you what I do for the cases. So when you do your two gaskets or your two seals for your counterbalance shaft, you don't put a fat bead on it. You just kind of want to get enough on the edge and just roll it in with your finger. Nice light coat. You're putting a light coat on all of this. Nothing's very thick. You don't want a lot of squeeze out. Here is okay, but inside the motor where you're doing your actual seals, you don't want thick. You want as thin as possible. Same for the mating surfaces. I do both sides of the case for the chamfers just to make sure that it's sealed all the way. Again, you're not putting a ton in here, you're just putting enough to where when you push the seal in, it squeezes out and it's evenly distributed across the chamfer. So don't gob it up. Okay?
Count how many times you said chamfer.
Oh,
the winner
yeah.
gets some stickers.
Alright, so the chamfers on both sides of the cases are done, and now we're going to move to the mating surface. So for the mating surface, I just do a nice thin bead in the center of the entire thing to my outer edges, and then once you have a thin bead across the whole thing, we'll smooth it in with our finger. Again, you can see how light this is, like it's barely there, which is fine because when you go to smooth it out with your finger, you're going to cover the entire case. So you're going to do a very thin, see how it's translucent, you can still see through the metal. That's what you want. You don't want it gobbed up. You're going to do both sides, very thin bead, and then smooth it out with your fingers. But you should not have real thick patches of red. So we'll do that now, and then we'll move on to installing our crank. Alright, so 5/18 is an anaerobic seal, which means, or sealant, which means that it doesn't start curing until it doesn't see oxygen anymore. So you don't have to worry about this drying on you like you would with a silicone or anything else. It's not going to start curing until the surfaces are mated together and all the oxygen is taken out of the way. So don't rush through it. Make sure it's evenly coated. Make sure it's 100% even, because if it's not, you'll have discrepancies between the cases. The other thing is that since we're about to assemble the case, if you bead blasted the case, you need to tap all of the threads in this entire case. So they're mostly 10 mil and 8 mil. So get an M10 and an M8 tap, put on some headphones, and spend 45 minutes tapping all of the holes, because it's very crucial that you have everything torqued down perfectly. And if you have crap in the threads from your bead blaster, or you washing it, or the old case or whatever, it's going to affect it. So take the time and tap every hole. All right, so before you put this in, 1, make sure it's going the correct way. 2, make sure you find your timing mark, which is there. It's laser etched on most of them. Sometimes it'll have like a little engraving, but there's our timing mark. So make sure that your PTO is facing the correct way and your crank is facing the correct way to screw on your magneto. And like I said, just keep in mind where the timing mark is, so when you put the counterbalance shaft in, you don't have any issues where you have to take this back out. Okay, so we're gonna lightly set the crank where it needs to go, move our seals into the correct designations, move our retaining washers, make sure all of our bearing posts are facing up so that we can rotate them as needed. Same with this. Okay, our seals are in, our retaining rings are in, and now we are going to refer to our case that has the cylinder reliefs in it, and we're going to rotate all of these the correct way. Before your crank is actually set into place, I take a little bit of assembly lube, very little amount, and I just put it very, very lightly inside of this so that on its first start it's not completely bone dry. I will slide the seal over the crank, lift up my crank so that it's not catching the case, insert it into its relief cuts, and then lightly drop it down, but don't let it bang down, because then you're going to pinch this side and won't be able to get it back up. So same thing for the rear seal. It's very sticky, it goes a long way.
That's what she said.
Oh yeah. Alright, you might want to spin the case around so you can get to it.
Gently spin the case.
Yeah, without touching all of that. Okay, we're going to lift up on this. Slide it into your relief cut. Lightly set it back down, because you still have to spin these bearings to the correct way. Okay, so that our crank is in. Now we're going to move to our counterbalance shaft. Alright, so this is the way that I do it. I get my timing mark up, I set it into place where I can see it and don't have to guess at it, and then I'll roll the counterbalance shaft where it needs to be, and then I'll set everything at that point. So I'll set that, set my seal, make sure the seal is pushed all the way back into the case. Okay, so that's in. Our seals are mated. Everything looks good. Our timing mark is perfectly timed. It's on that tooth with that center.
We'll post a photo of that so they can see.
So we're going to spin it over really quick, make sure it's all good. Okay, it's good to go. Now that your seals are in, counterbalance shaft's in, your seals are mated against the case and not free floating towards the actual front of the bearing, we're going to clock all of our bearings so that it sits in the reliefs. So here's our case. They're both facing the same way, so you have to imagine it on top of the motor. Sorry, engine, because somebody's gonna forgive me shit about that. So the centers, if the PTO is facing towards you, the centers are going to go to the right, and the outer and fronter bearings are going to go to the left. So you're going to turn them until they hit the case. You have to go to each side and lift it up. Okay, so now we have all of our bearings rotated the correct way so that when it goes into the case, they are in the reliefs and locked in, so that you do not have a bearing free spinning on you, or you're not being able to bolt down the case because you're trying to fight that pin, and it's never going to happen. Alright, so our reliefs have 5/18 in them, but just put a very light bead on the O-ring, This is your caps for your counterbalance shaft assembly. So once they are inside of it, we're just gonna press it in, make sure they are mated all the way down, and do the exact same thing on the back side. So now you're gonna go through your entire case since you've been fingering this one.
Oh.
And you're gonna touch up any areas that you took away 5/18 by lifting up the crank or whatever you did. You have it on the other side, so you should be more than covered, but better safe than sorry. So we're just gonna touch up a couple areas that our fingers got, and then we're gonna mate the cases together. All right, so you're gonna take the top half of your case, whatever handy you are, do that. Do you have your dominant hand ready to catch the rods? So you're gonna put your first rod through, and then you're going to put the other rod through without touching any of it, and then you're going to press it so that it seats into place. So when you assemble your case, you're going to do two things with all of your case bolts. You're going to roll 5/18 across the threads here, nice even coat, and then you're going to put a little dab of fastener assembly. I use ARP, or you can use the Moly coat, which is the same thing as what Seadoo uses from the factory, but this will do the same thing. This is for cars. So we'll do it on each top of your actual head, and then your 5/18 is going to go on your threads. So put them all in place, and then we'll go to the torque sequence. We're going to screenshot the torque sequence for you at the end of this explanation, and we'll do put the literature up so you can read it of what to do. But you torque these in 3 different passes. So first is the orientation, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. And then you're going to torque everything down to 9 foot-pounds following that sequence. And then after 9 foot-pounds, you're going to torque down to 20 foot-pounds, same sequence. And then after you're done with 20 foot-pounds, you're going to torque the larger M10s to 30 foot-pounds before you're completely done. So to get these somewhat snugged up, I use the sequence, but I use my drill just to make it a little bit faster. But you do not apply any pressure on this. This should not be clamping your case. This should not be doing anything. It's just to take up the slack so you're not there forever wrenching on these bolts. So here's an example, and then I'll do the rest behind camera. That's it. That's it. So torque them all the sequence. We'll post the sequence, and then we'll go over torquing. Now that we got them all snugged down, like I said before, we're gonna pass it with 10 in the same sequence, 20 in the same sequence, and then 30 on the large ones only. So make sure you have a nice torque wrench. Don't use an extension with a short socket. Use a deep socket if you can. So we're gonna torque these now, and then we'll move on to the next step. And like I said before, we're gonna post a screenshot now of not only the sequence, but the pattern for the torque sequence.
Oh, the secret sauce is
All right,
back
so
out.
if you watch us, you know we love acetone. So I'm gonna take acetone now because I have not only the stud lube on all over my nice engine that was just bead blasted, but I also have 5/18 on it. So the key here is that you don't want a rag that's dripping. So put a little bit on, and then squeeze out your rag right in your bloodstream, dude. You feel it?
I'm getting high already.
So squeeze out your rag so it's just a little bit damp, because you don't want a crap ton of acetone somehow wicking out your sealant. And just real quickly wipe your squeeze out and any of your grease, because if you don't wipe the squeeze out, no matter what primer you use or paint you use or whatever you use, that squeeze out will return in your paint within a week. It looks mint, and then a week later, after a couple heat cycles and stuff, and the paint starts doing its thing, all of it will start turning red around the whole engine. It looks terrible. I've done it before, so take my experience.
2 minutes of patience goes a long way.
Yeah, and use it. So I'm getting out all my oil, my little grease from my studs out of the way, because when you paint this bottom end, it's going to spread from the air pressure. We use HVLP gun in automotive paint, but it'll even do it with a spray can, and it'll disperse this across the engine and in the air, and then you'll get fish eyes over your whole motor. So take the time, wipe out down as best you can, Don't go too crazy on it, because when you're done and it's fully assembled and cured, you can always go back with like a CARB cleaner or something and just shoot all this out, because it's sealed by then and you don't have to worry about it. So we got most of it. Kind of go in where the mating surfaces are inside of it. Get all that. Doesn't really matter. And now we'll move on to our next step. So now that your case is together, you're going to take this Allen key out and you're going to fill this hole with 40 milliliters of SAE 30. Now before we go any further, so that we can properly torque down everything, we need to put the cylinders on. So I'll bring my rod up the top to the center. I'll put a little bit of assembly lube inside of this, just roll it around, and then immediately put my bearing inside of it, roll that around so it has a lot of assembly lube on it. Wipe off the excess. Oh, she really shot on us.
Little squirter.
Little squirter. Alright, so that one's good. And then you can put your piston on. So your piston has an arrow on it and it needs to face towards the exhaust. So on the 951, it needs to face towards the reed case. So it'll go on like this, and then we'll roll our dowel rod through it, and then I'll show you how to put the C-clips in. Alright, so to make it easier myself, when I put the actual wrist pin in, I'll put the retaining clip in first. So I'll put the retaining clip in, making sure that this open face is not with my relief cutout, which is helping you pry out the pins when you disassemble. So I'll cock it off to the side, because you're not supposed to put it down or up because of the rotation of the engine. So push it off to the side, install this, and then we'll move on to installing it on the engine. Alright, so now that one of our clips is in, we're going to put our wrist pin in. So we're just going to center our piston in. I rotate this, helps go through the actual casting of the piston. I'll rotate it all the way in, and then you should be able to push these straight in. You should not have to hammer these in, force them in any way. They should slide right in, especially with that assembly lube. If they don't, and you're using an old crank, you might have a little bit of a warped lobe, so I would check it before you force it in there, but they should slide in exactly how you just saw. Then you're going to put your C-clip on, and you're going to proceed to the other side, same exact way. Now that you have your pistons installed, we're going to set squish. Leave the rings off so you can fit the pistons in the cylinders without fighting with the rings. I'm going to put the cylinder on first with no base gasket, put the head on, and then squish my solder to see what my specs are. Once we get the squish with no gaskets, we can then mic these, figure out what it is, add to see what we can get closest to, and then once we have the squish that we want, then we'll tighten it all up and torque it all down to spec. So now we're installing all of our studs. Now that our cylinders are on, we're gonna install all the studs, same practice as before, or you can use blue Loc-Tite. I use 518. Your studs are gonna go to the the whole inner will be studs and both outers will be studs, the rest of the bolts. So we're gonna put all of our studs in snug by hand, and then we're gonna do the double lock nut. We're gonna take two of our nuts from our head originally, we're gonna lock them together, and then we're gonna torque all these studs down to 11 foot-pounds, and then we'll show you installing the head and torquing everything down in the pattern from Seadoo.
Alright, Nick's gonna show you how he uses his nuts.
Jesus. Alright, so here's a double nut technique. So you put your 15 mil open end, 15 mil open end, you tighten them against each other, and then you're gonna take your torque wrench and you're gonna torque it down to, fucking Nick didn't even put the goddamn socket on. Then you're gonna then you're gonna torque it down to 11 foot-pounds, which is tricky at this point because your motor's spinning on you. Okay, so there it is, 11 foot-pounds, and you're gonna repeat that on every single stud. Same way, take it off, loosen them together, move on to the next one. So now your cylinders are on and all your studs are in. I'm gonna take a little bit of assembly lube so I'm not spinning it over dry. I'm just gonna kind of coat the cylinders before we put our solder in and start spinning it over to our squish test. Not a lot, just need something so that the, you probably don't need it, but I like it better with a little bit of lube in there.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. Alright, so now that the lube's in, you're going to take a piece of your solder. Well, you're going to make sure this is all the way down first. Okay, so now that the lube is in, you're going to take a piece of your solder. You're going to cut it. And then you're going to snake it. You're going to go parallel with your wrist pins. So you're going to kind of wall to wall. It's going to be a little bit bigger, so that's fine. Just get it in and straight. Kind of like this. It needs to go to the edge of the cylinders on both sides because you're measuring squish so that it's equal. Okay, so it's gonna look something like that. You're gonna do it for both cylinders, and then once you have that in each cylinder, we're gonna torque down the head and everything with it so that it's as if you were fully assembled, and we'll spin the motor over and check the squish. So now that I have my head torqued down, I'm gonna put my flywheel on. I'm gonna spin the engine over, and you're gonna feel it push your solder. Okay, so now that it's spinning over freely now with no effort, you squished it to how it should be. So now we're gonna take this head back off and measure our squish. Now that we've done the squish process, we're gonna take the head back off so we can measure our squish. We're gonna go to the most outside edge and we're gonna take our measurement. So it's 0.0465, and the other side should be relatively the same. Outermost edge, 0.065. I'm sorry, 0.0465. So this is our mag. Our PTO is 0.0455. And 0.0455. Okay, so now we're gonna write these down, and then we're gonna measure our base gasket. So our base gasket, the 5-hole, our base gasket is 0.015. So we got to write those down, and then we'll measure the head. So we have mag 0.0465, PTO 0.0455, and our base gasket is 0.015. And now we're going to go to our head, right where our squish band is going to be, and we're going to measure that part, which is 0.026. 0.026 is our head. That's gonna get crushed a little bit, so your numbers will fluctuate a tiny bit when this is all bolted together. So we have 0.0465 plus 0.015 plus 0.026. That gives us 0.0875. By the time we bolt it down, it'll probably see 0.085-ish. So I'm happy with that. It's in spec, and we're gonna go ahead and bolt it together. If you want to get a tighter clearance, I've seen guys separate this to where it's not a double layer anymore. I'm not gonna do that because this customer is gonna beat the crap out of his ski, and I feel better with the safer clearance than anything. If I ever wanted more compression down the road, I could do like a milled head or whatever I want to do on that, but for right now we're in spec, so we're gonna roll with it. All right, on these rings, you're gonna look for the dowels that are in the piston. So if your arrow is on this side, the dowels are on the opposite side. So you're gonna set your ring, both the rings are identical. You're gonna set your ring in the first chamfer, slowly walk it down, not putting a lot of pressure on the ring because you will snap it. Okay, so there's one. Make sure the ring is not binding at all. You're good. You're gonna take your other ring, find your dowel, line it up with the dowel, rotate it around until it snaps on. Do not cock these off to one side just to get them, and then snap them on like entirely. You'll break the ring, so just be careful with them and slowly just rotate it until it drops into place. And then right before you put your cylinders and stuff on, make sure you check your wrist pins to make sure they're seated in your piston grooves completely. Just double check your work, because if they're not, they will come out and you will lose the top end and you'll be back to square one. So we're
stuck on the beach.
Yeah, we're gonna repeat the other side, and then we'll go over the gasket and putting on the actual cylinders. A lot of guys put these on dry. I don't like to put them on dry because I've had them squish out on me before. So I use a very, very light coat of 518, extremely light, like lighter than the case, obviously. So I use a very light coat, put the base gasket on, light coat on my cylinders, put the cylinders on, torque it down to spec. So you can do it however you want. You can put it on dry. That's just my order of operation. I've been doing it forever and I've never had any problems. So I'm gonna put a little bit of 5/18 on now, and then I'll show you how to put down the cylinders. All right, so I'm just gonna show what my example of very thin is. If you can see this, there's barely anything on here. It's very, 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 very light. So if you're gonna use 5/18 and you're gonna put your base gasket on with it, this is what you wanna go after. It's barely there. It's just a little bit of reinsurance. Just something to tack it down. So I got my rings compressed and they're on my dowels. So I'm gonna start with the top one first, like the highest piston up first, and we're just gonna walk it on. So once this one's in, okay, now we'll move on to this one, and we will compress, kind of rotate our shaft down, compress these rings, then put it on the exact same way. Make sure you don't pinch the gasket when you put it on, because you'll ruin it. And if you need somebody and you can't do it by yourself, use a buddy to help you hold the cylinders.
What are we doing here, Nick?
Alright, so now as I said before, you need to take all your old rings in your rebuild kit and they go over the studs and into the recessed area that your stud's sitting in. This is for vibration. Make sure they're all in, and I push them down like a tad bit with a very, very blunt flathead screwdriver.
Cool.
Just a tiny bit, like very, very little. Kind of manipulate the stud a little bit. So there's one, just like that. Our squish is done. You don't have to do the 5/18 in the base gasket. Like I said, it's a very, very thin amount. It's so translucent, there's barely anything there. It should not alter your squish. That's up to you whether you want to do it or not. I've had gaskets push out on me. I do this on every ski. I've never had a problem with it. I know it doesn't say in the manual. It's just something I do. All right, so now we're gonna put our head gasket on. We gotta pay attention to our dowels. They're kitty corner from each other. They're both in the top of the head, or in top of the cylinders and on the actual head. So we're gonna set it into place. We're not using any type of sealant for this. Once our head gasket's on, we can put our head on. Okay, making sure all of our dowels line up. Now that our dowels line up, we're gonna insert all of our bolts that should be wire wheeled. We're gonna put a little bit of 5/18 on each one of the threads. You can use blue Loc-Tite, which is what it calls for in the manual, but 5/18 is just fine. So we're gonna put all these bolts in, put all of our nuts on, and then we're gonna proceed to torquing it down per spec and per manufacturer sequence. All right, so same before, just like I did with the case bolts, I'm gonna use my impact, and I'm just gonna go real light till it's snug. I'm not tightening any of these. None of these are tight at all. It's just so I don't have to wrench all of them down. The small bolts are 13s and the actual nuts are 15s. So I'm gonna take all these down and then I'll go through the actual specs and sequence of torquing everything. All right, so now that all my bolts are snug down, I'm gonna do this, not only the sequence, but the actual torque spec. So the first torque spec on the entire first pass is 11 foot-pounds. Then you have to go the entire head again, and it's down to 25 foot-pounds, which is your final number. So I'll display both the sequence and the procedure for the torque specs now. I have all these torqued down to 11 foot-pounds. Now we're gonna go through the entire sequence again per the manufacturer, and we're gonna do 25 foot-pounds, which is our final number, and we're done. So I'll display the sequence and the foot-pounds one more time right now. All right, so now that everything's torqued down, we're gonna check our squish for a final time. So you're gonna take your piece of solder, you're gonna put it in the shape of an L, you're gonna put it down into inside the cylinder until you can fill a cylinder wall. Again, parallel with your wrist pins. And you're going to turn over your engine with the flywheel installed until it bumps. Once you feel it bump, we can pull it out and check our measurement. All right, so we have a final number, outside edge. Make sure you have flat spots on it and that you actually hit it with your solder of 0.0795, which is perfect. It's right within manufacturer specs, not super low, not super high. We're happy with that, so we're gonna move on and finish assembly. When you measure for squish, don't forget that you have to have all sides of the cylinders. So before, when we put our piece of solder in the cylinder, we had it across the entire thing so that when we turned it over, it clamped down both sides simultaneously. Obviously, we can't do that because we're not gonna take the cylinders apart or feed it or like fish it out of the exhaust port. So make sure you take a measurement of all sides to make sure they're within the same tolerance that you just took. because if they're vastly different, something's wrong, you need to fix it. Now that you're assembling your front end, so we're gonna put the Bendix bearing on, and we're gonna put the mag with the flywheel on. So make sure that this bearing again is in there. If you removed it for bead blasting like we did, make sure it's in. I'm gonna take a little bit of jet pump lube, I'm gonna put it in the bearings, and then I'm just gonna kind of roll it around my finger, just as something to start the bearings with.
Finger blasting it?
Yeah. I'm gonna put my Bendix in, roll it around, roll that oil around, right? And then we're gonna put our Bendix retainer in. Make sure that this spring is in the Bendix retainer. You're going to tighten this in a crossover pattern. So you're gonna tighten this one a little bit, tighten this one a little bit until you're snug. And then we'll move on to putting our flywheel and our magneto cup on. So a trick that I like to do before I put my flywheel and magneto cup on is I put a little 5/18 on the snout of the crank. So I'll just spread it around. Make sure that your flywheel key is in at this point. I put a little 5/18 before I put that in too. If you have a new crank, make sure you transferred it over or bought a new one. I'd buy a new one. They're very cheap. They're like $2. Okay. So that just in my head, when I put 5/18 on here, it like absorbs some of the shock of when you go to start the engine and stuff. It could possibly not be true, but I sleep better at night knowing I did it, so that's what I do. I'm gonna put 5/18 on the threads for the nut, and then we're going to torque the nut down the spec. And I'll show you what to do in order so that your engine doesn't spin over to torque this down the spec. So to stop your engine from spinning over, you're gonna put a microfiber towel or some type of towel inside the cylinder. Rotate it until it's tight. Now you're gonna take a 1/2" torque wrench that's set to 85 foot-pounds with an 1 1/16" socket, and going to tighten it to spec. There it is. All right, so we took apart our stator cover. So here's what it should look like fully assembled. Make sure all this is cleaned up. You don't have a bunch of debris anywhere. Check your magneto cup, make sure there's no metal shavings that would cause debris. Okay, so now it's in. You're going to get your O-ring. You're gonna put the O-ring inside of this groove. And then we're gonna take our screws and we're gonna torque it all down to spec. Before you bolt all this down, if you're leaving your oil injection, we're not, because this is gonna be a premix RXX. Make sure you put your shaft back on your flywheel bolt, because once you put it on, or once you put this case on, you're not gonna get it in. So put the shaft in first if you're leaving oil injection. Otherwise, I'm gonna do a cross pattern. I'm gonna use a gun, but I'm not tightening anything. Again, I'm just running the bolts in. So I'm gonna go cross pattern, get my case snug, and then once you have all your bolts in, it's 80 inch-pounds for all these. I just go in a crisscross pattern. Now we're at our final step for the PTO. We're gonna put the PTO into place where it belongs, and then we're going to put some Loc-Tite on our PTO bolt. I'm using 5/18 again. Okay, make sure this washer's on. And then we're going to torque this down to 85 foot-pounds, just like our flywheel bolt. Now that our PTO is on, the bolt is torqued to 85 foot-pounds, we're gonna put the spline on. So with 5/18 on our Allen keys, I'm gonna put this one in first just to hold it, so I can put the other bolts in. And then we're going to torque all of these down to 17 foot-pounds. Next, we're gonna make sure that our spacing is correct between our actual cage and the reed. So spec is 0.512. I have my gauge locked to 0.512. You're gonna go to the outside of the reed to the middle, outside of the cage to the middle, and I have 0.512. And you're just gonna make sure that they're all the same on all sides. Manipulate it a little bit until you can get it to the same spec. So once you have it set to spec, you're going to insert it inside and put your cover on and torque it to spec. We're gonna hold off on this because when we film this, we realize that there is some dry rot in here, so we're gonna order new ones of these. But that's how you would do it if you have new ones or ones that you can utilize from the existing. But we're not gonna sell the rave valves at this time because the rave valves that are 951 are vacuum operated from the solenoid. We're gonna show you how to modify the rave valves so that they work as a 787 does off of the actual engine. So we'll do that as a follow-up video after this one. So because I know everybody's gonna ask, everything that I used today, the rebuilt crank that's from CV Tech, the rebuilt counterbalance shaft, and the cylinders that were bored along with the pistons and gasket set were all done by AP Customs, and I'll link his description in the bottom so that you can use him for all your boring or cylinders or crankshafts or whatever else you need. That's who I used in this one, and the turnaround time was really good.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. We know it is a very long video, but we wanted to give you as much detail as possible as regards to building the 951. So we hope you enjoyed it. Do check back into the channel because we do have some new videos coming out with the Challenger boat rebuild. I'm going to be building my ski as well, and then Jarman apparently is going to start racing, so he's going to build one himself. So thanks again for tuning in. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.